answers to what are ultimately some very reasonable questions. Why is it not only acceptable, but in some cases state-sanctioned, that non-white races have spaces for themselves, special help, and are allowed a sense of group identity? In some cases, almost forced into having a group identity, and yet the concept of the white populations of those areas having the same things is totally taboo, going on to the point of being branded extremism, racism, and xenophobia, when it's merely people having an interest in their own ability to live their lives, and for their children to be able to live lives while being welcome in the countries of their birth. People also are now wanting answers to other questions, such as, why is the endless diversity that is supposedly a strength only seeming to cause strife and discord, and from whence does this come? What is it that is causing people to refuse integration, and why is there so much hostility when there really shouldn't be any? And further to this, why is the hostility from one side actively covered up and excused, but anything even vaguely leaning towards some sense of, not even ill will, but merely questioning from the other side is shut down so hard with accusations of ists and isms? When socio-political problems like these begin to affect how people live their lives in very simple but tangible ways, such as the degradation of local neighborhoods, increasing levels of violence, gang behavior, weapon and drug offenses, and human trafficking, and so on, it should be somewhat unsurprising that people will have negative reactions to such things and demand answers and solutions. When many of these activities seem to be tied statistically to certain religious affiliations or ethnic groups, then it hardly seems surprising that those factors would be in line for discussion. But until the Overton window shifts to allow for such things, there will always be the response and cries of racism, xenophobia, and now Nazi. One of the things I find most curious about this entire topic is the use of shaming language and other more underhanded tactics, like personal attacks and threats to silence people who do speak on these topics. Over the past several years now in the online politosphere of the YouTubes, we've seen, mostly from the social justice side, these sorts of tactics used in absolute swathes. Personal attacks, shaming, lies, smearing, doxing, etc. These have been the mainstay of their assault in all spheres of discourse. Seeing these same tactics spread out from their domain to infect other, more self-proclaimed rational and logical people is a curious shift in events, especially since these tactics are now being deployed against a target that has ultimately been seasoned against this strategy. They are well aware that this sort of behavior is the domain of the coward with no arguments left, who is merely trying to silence ideas and people they don't like on the ground of ideology rather than rationality. In some ways, this is not surprising. Increasingly, we are seeing the polarization of politics. The further outreaches of left and right are rising, with a rapidly shrinking middle ground. And I don't think it's unfair or inaccurate to point out that the use of these sorts of tactics, and an unwillingness to engage with certain topics in a calm and rational manner, is part of the reason why this divide exists, and is splitting even further down the middle, resulting even more in the spread of sentiments along the line of, I'm not X, but soon will be, because simply to be otherwise will no longer be permissible. Targets get bigger and bigger, engulfing more and more people as the discourse becomes ever more simplified because of a lack of willingness to engage with ideas some people find uncomfortable, and so rather than talk, listen and learn, they will instead simply declare, that is verboten and now you are one of them. It interests me how a simple topic of discussion is increasingly fragmenting people and making them form into their own little groups, desperate.
I think it's interesting, after the last few years of talking about the crossover points between, you know, the Venn diagram of certain skeptics and the alt-right, to sort of look back at the ones that you always suspected to be alt-right, but weren't willing to spell it out. So, for example, Teal Deer has always been a prime suspect for me, and, you know, revisiting his channel recently, I noticed that he used the Stefan Molyneux defense for going full alt-right, which a lot of the people that came out of the skeptic community and into the alt-right used the moral philosophy of rationalism to justify their transformation. Because after all, what J.F. Gariepi and a couple of other alternative hypotheses have done is create a bridge, but it's not of substance, it's of language. So what basically happened is they've found a means of making racism into something, forming it into rational language, and then it became the ultimate trump card for the Sargonites, who used rationalism and reason as their banner, facts over feels. So someone like Molyneux, for example, or Teal'c get away with now going, well, I'm just following the facts. I'm just accepting the data, which the whole problem with rationalism or empiricism as practiced by the skeptics and the Sargonites is the idea that data can only be read one way. That you can just present someone with data and it doesn't need any context, the numbers don't lie. That's not true. Studies can be manipulated, mistakes can be made, methodologies can be wrong. There's all kinds of ways that facts are not absolute. You know what I mean? And then you have the even wider problem of a correlation not being causation, which is you can take facts and data and correlate them to all kinds of shit they don't have any kind of impact on. That's for example, alternative hypotheses go to. That's his big revelation, is that genes predict everything. Genes predict your politics. Genes predict your ethics. Genes, but again, all he does is take random studies, bullshit studies, data, statistical noise, and then sculpt those three things for whoever comes along into a narrative. He tells a story about neutral or deficient statistical information. So I remember when Molyneux was on Dave Rubin, he used this thing of like, I don't want to be a racist, but the numbers, the facts, I can't dispute the numbers, the data. What's funny is that this has always been the case too, even during like Victorian times, where the establishment would have quacks that would talk about black criminality. We're still on that. We're still in a situation where someone like Teal'c gets to escape accountability. I think that's what he's talking about with shaming and all that stuff. The biggest problem the skeptics have with the SJWs, right, is that we hold them accountable. So what they want is a system in which they can say things that are racist, sexist, misogynist, and so forth, but we don't call it that. So they basically want, when he complains about is and isms, he wants to be able to say that black people are genetically inferior to white people without somebody coming out and going, no, that's racist. You know what I mean? There's so much moral cowardice here, right down to him not being willing to accept the accusation or the title of being alt-right. He believes in RK selection theory, right? He believes in race realism, but he doesn't want to at least, take the responsibility and the criticism, he's exploiting suppositionalism too, which is like the idea of I'm just asking the questions. Can we have these conversations? I just want to have a conversation about this. Well, it's not that simple. You know what I mean? And sometimes, when you watch Fox News, you'll find all the propaganda is phrased as a question. You can make assertions within asking a question and actually close the debate or spread propaganda veiled within a question, a supposition. You know what I'm saying? That's part of the spectrum with whataboutism. There's a lot of gaslighting going on here too. Of like, I'm not a bigot. You're just putting that label on me. Here are my bigoted thoughts. Here's my bigoted science. But again, I don't want to be held accountable for what I say. I want to have unlimited intellectual vanity, because that's what this really comes down to. In the end, the big win that the alt-right, the big hammer that the alt-right could drop on skeptics is that, number one, they were a group of people making claims of rationalism that weren't true, making claims of empiricism that weren't true. Basically, the Sargonites were people that were LARPing, that were dressed up and playing scientists when they weren't, with very few exceptions. Thunderfoot is a scientist, but Sargon is not a scientist or anything near a scientist. He's a fucking failed basement-dwelling video game designer. Most of the other skeptics are just either failed e-celebs, personality vloggers, but they were always like rational reason, empiricism. T.J. Kirk, for example, was just some dumbass trailer park scumbag, some fucking Louisiana mud boy, who used reason as a fashion. You know what I'm saying? It was just a stance. It's all horseshit. The reason they were able to get hoodwinked by the alt-right is that the alt-right just took something stupid and wrapped it in scientific language. And they were just, the skeptic community, the ones that did go alt-right like Teal Deer, I'm going to qualify that, the ones that went all the way with the alt-right stuff, they were, they consumed their own kind of moral destruction because it was couched in intellectual language, and they like playing the role of intellectual. They like playing the role of sort of arbiter of the facts. So this is just internet. This is more like internet role playing. You know what I mean? I do always try to mention, that some members of the skeptic community didn't go all the way. Theron Meyer didn't go all the way. Particularly, she didn't go all the way to where the fuck Blair White has gone. Jeff Holiday, Sophane, Vadim Newquist, who runs Creationist Cat, he didn't go all the way. And that's because those people never sort of like made claims that they were like Thunderfoot level scientists. You know what I mean? And they didn't buy the hype. They continued to be skeptical even when it would have been to their benefit not to be. And that's what you have to do. I mean, the people that are called the people that are called SJWs in this YouTube community, people like Christy Winters or Steve Shives, are also skeptics. And just because they didn't get on the Patreon train of anti-feminism, like Teal Deer, and then the second Patreon train, the super chat train of white nationalism, they're sort of dismissed as skeptics. But if fucking alternative hypothesis is a skeptic, I'm a can of SpaghettiOs.